In January 2010, Cameron Kroot was born in a Florida hospital. His mother was Theda Sue. She was 39 years old. His father was Roderick Kroot, who was also 39 years old. But 4 months later, on April the 9th, 2010, it was around 2 a.m. in Florida, a neighbor called police saying she woke up to the sound of someone screaming, "Oh my God." The screams came from Theda Sue. A domestic dispute occurred at 506 Pine Road in Nokomis, Florida, where they all lived. See, the couple were to separate, and there was suspicion that Roderick found a new girlfriend. During the domestic dispute, which lasted for hours, Theda became armed with at least 4 different knives, which Roderick physically removed from her. 4 knives? I barely have 4 friends. What the hell? Roderick, in fear of his safety, attempted to leave the house and entered the garage. Theda entered the garage holding baby Cameron in her arm. She also had a steak knife in her right hand. Roderick took the knife from her and placed it into a tool chest. Roderick attempted to get into his vehicle to leave, but he was interrupted because Theda became armed with a sledgehammer. Sledgehammer? What? She was holding Cameron in her left arm this time and the sledgehammer in her right hand. She then raised the sledgehammer over her head. Roderick grabbed her hand and removed the sledgehammer. He was able to get into his vehicle and lock the door so that she could not get in. He began backing out of the garage, and Sue then became armed with a crowbar. So she goes from knife to sledgehammer to crowbar. She then used the crowbar in an attempt to keep Roderick from leaving, to forcibly open the car door. Roderick slowly backed out of the garage and into the driveway. But remember, Theda is holding Cameron in her left arm. She raised the crowbar to crack the car window. But while she's raising the crowbar over her head, Cameron slips out of her arms. As he slips out, Roderick is backing the car out. He goes over baby Cameron. Wow. Knives, crowbars, what is going on? Roderick then took baby Cameron to the hospital, but Cameron was pronounced dead. Now this case is very rare. The outcome, the sentencing, is gonna blow your mind, but I'll come back to that shortly. Theda was later taken to hospital by deputies when they interviewed her the first time. She told them that they needed to speak with Roderick and that he could tell them what happened. But then this is when police told her, "Sorry love, but your son, he just died." But she didn't believe them and she kept telling them, No, go talk to Roderick, ask him what happened. She did say, however, that they were having a normal argument as boyfriends and girlfriends do. They had been arguing in the house, and the reason that they went into the garage was because Roderick was leaving. She didn't mention knives or anything, and during this initial interview, Theda did confirm that Roderick has never been physical with her. She stated that Roderick is the non-confrontational type and generally likes to leave when arguments happen. But she denied that she had taken any illegal or prescription medication. She did admit, however, that she drank some vodka and orange earlier in the night. She said that she and Roderick were going to be moving and that they were packing up the house to move to Colorado. They were moving there for an agriculture business. She advised that she and Roderick had been together for nearly 2 years. They were having relationship problems and they were separating. Well, 1, how does that explain you guys leaving to Colorado together? It doesn't. And 2, you still haven't mentioned the knives. I wonder why. She then claimed that she doesn't have a boyfriend, but that Roderick has another girlfriend. And she said that at the time of this incident, they were arguing about the relationship and this other girlfriend. Of course, this questioning took place at the hospital, so police said, okay, no problem, let's now go speak to Roderick. He told them that he's been dating Theda for again 2 years and that they have been living together for 1.5 years. Roderick advised that there'd never been any domestic problems with her in which police were called. He stated, but there was this one incident in which she had made threats and that he had to disarm her because she held a knife. So she has previous. He did confirm he was seeing another woman and Theda talked about ending their relationship. He confirmed there was another incident approximately 1 month previously in which she was gone for a week. She did not contact Roderick and did not tell him where she was. Roderick had to take care of baby Cameron and could not get a hold of her. He then said that ending the relationship with Theda was not going well. He stated that she threatened to make up allegations against him in order to get Roderick in trouble. He said that she believed this would help her keep custody of their son. And during the week that they were discussing their relationship status, everything was civil until Theda began to drink alcohol. She was drinking a lot. She got louder and more argumentative. And on the night in question, Theda was yelling, causing Cameron to cry. Roderick would pick Cameron up, hold him and calm him down. At one point, while Roderick was calming Cameron down, Theda went into the kitchen and got a knife. Seems she liked knives, eh? She was spinning the knife around while he was holding Cameron. Roderick said that Theda had a sinister laugh and was poking the knife on his knees, and he wasn't sure what she intended to do with the knife. He then put Cameron down, took the knife from Theda and threw it under the couch. He said that Theda made a lot of threats and he was not sure what she was going to do. But later, Theda was holding Cameron and that Theda grabbed other knives and was threatening Roderick. He advised that he took the knife from her and then took all the other knives from the house and put them somewhere where she couldn't find them. This kind of incident happened a few days before the day of the death, and on that day there was another incident. She has knives, she's going after him. He said he went and got his keys and went into the garage. She had Cameron in her left arm and that Theda grabbed a sledgehammer. He said that he disarmed her, got rid of the sledgehammer and she went back inside. He gets into his car, the windows were up and the doors were locked. He opened the garage door and he was backing up. He's trying to get out of there. And then he sees Theda, she's got a crowbar, but she also has the baby in her arms. She raised the crowbar as if she was going to put the crowbar through the window of the car. Next thing he sees is that Cameron is slipping out of her arms. Roderick also said that his purpose at that time was to leave the house and defuse the situation. He advised that he doesn't know if she did this to Cameron intentionally, but she did let go of him when she raised the crowbar. After the accident, he picked Cameron up, got into the car, driving him to the hospital. All he wanted to do was leave, and he didn't want to get anyone injured. He didn't want to get injured himself with a sledgehammer nor a crowbar. The last thing he wanted was Cameron to get hurt. He believed she would never do anything purposefully to him, but she did threaten to take Cameron away from him. He also said that at least 4 different times on that night, he had to disarm Theda from 4 different knives. He took all the knives he could find and again put them somewhere she couldn't find them. So after this interview, police then went to interview Theda again away from the hospital, when she's had a few days to calm down and formulate her thoughts. She did confirm that again she's been dating Roderick for 2 years, but she did also say they were having problems soon after Cameron was born. And it was in February that she became aware that Roderick was seeing someone else around a month after Cameron was born. At the time, Roderick claimed that no, she's just a friend. But Theda found out that Roderick was more than a friend. So then, on that week, Roderick finally confessed, yes, I have this new girl, I like her, I don't like you, and this is when they start to argue more and more. And she did confirm that she left Cameron at the house and went to stay at a hotel. They were trying to work things out, but on the Thursday before the murder, things changed and they started arguing more. Roderick was saying that he did not love her, but loved his new girlfriend. He still wanted to have a relationship with her so he can stay in contact with Cameron. Theda then told police that during her pregnancy, Roderick was never there for her, and that he was always upset at her and would always yell at her. Now when Roderick was getting into his car and trying to leave, Theda confirmed she picked up Cameron and took him with her because he was crying and she didn't want him to cry. She did confirm the reason why Roderick left was because he did not want to argue with her anymore. She then ran out the door after Roderick to get him to stop and not to leave. His car was parked inside the garage and the garage door was open. Roderick got in the car and backed out of the garage. She tried to open the door, but the door was locked. She said that the side mirror made contact with her and moved her out of the way. But it wasn't that hard of a contact and there were no marks on her arm. But again, while all this was going on, she was holding the baby. She did admit at some point that she had a knife in her hand and she was going to slash the tires on the vehicle. And this is interesting because in the first interview, she denied holding any knives. She claims she only had Cameron in her arms when she went into the garage, and she denied that she had a sledgehammer in her hands. The knife, she admits. Sledgehammer? No, however. She did admit, though, to grabbing a crowbar, and that the reason she had Cameron in her arms was because Cameron was crying. She told police Cameron must have slipped out of her hands as Roderick was backing out. She went on to say that she's a bad mother and deserves to go to jail because Cameron is dead and she should have protected him. She denied placing Cameron on the ground on purpose. Now, after all the interviews were done, police searched the residence. There were items that they found. They found all the knives, one with a black handle that was taken from under a sofa. Of course, all the images in this video so far are from the crime scene. There was a crowbar that was seized from the driveway. A baby bottle was also seized from the driveway. The baby bottle contained some formula in it. In the garage, there were a number of knives that were taken. The sledgehammer was also found. There was also a swab of blood taken from the driveway. There were also photographs of some marijuana that was found in the back bedroom. Photographs were taken of a bottle of vodka on the counter. There was also a surveillance camera on the front of the residence, but this camera was not functioning, so there's no video of the incident. Now, what do you think happened in the end? Remember, let me reiterate. She had a baby in her hand. The baby slipped just as he's backing up. He runs over the child passes away. Who do you think is culpable? I've never heard of a crime like that before, but you gotta think. She's going after him with knives, crowbars, sledgehammers. I know, I've repeated myself a lot in this video. It's because I cannot comprehend. What are you doing, you silly cow? So Roderick wasn't charged, but Theodore was. She was charged with felony child neglect. In 2010, the outcome of her trial was adjudication withheld by judge. You ever heard that before? Do you know what that means? So, took me a while to figure this out. You see, in Florida, where this took place, this is a special sentence in which the judge orders probation, but does not formally convict the defendant of a criminal offense. In other words, she was placed on probation and nobody went to jail. Oh my days, what do you think? Yes, it was an accident, but her specific actions led to the child's death. She did not intend it for sure, but do you think probation was the answer? 4 months old. 4 months old. Thank you for watching. And now the tragic case of Dylan Freeman. This video will put you in a dilemma. Are you held accountable if you're legally insane? Let me tell you this shocking story and you decide. Olga Freeman pled guilty to the manslaughter of her 10-year-old son, Dylan. She took his life on the 15th of August 2020. The judge said, "It is clear that you did what you did while in the grip of a serious mental illness. You remain gravely ill." The expert psychiatrists who met and assessed her at the Orchard Secure Unit at St. Bernard's Hospital in West London all agreed that this is one of those rare and desperately sad cases when a devoted parent commits a shocking act of violence towards a precious, innocent, beloved child while completely out of their right mind. You see, Olga was born in Russia in 1989 and had a professional career as a lawyer. She then meets Dean Freeman and moved to England, marrying him in 2006. On the 3rd of January 2010, her son Dylan was born. Dylan did not develop as expected, and he had a complex range of significant disorders, including features of autism, significant learning disabilities, neutropenia, which is a blood cell disorder, and Cohen's syndrome, which is a very rare autosomal recessive genetic disorder, which leads to a variety of physical and mental symptoms, including poor muscle tone and diminishing eyesight. In 2012, Olga separated from Dylan's father, divorcing a few years ago. He moved to Spain, and Dylan spent the summers of 2018 and 2019 with him, which gave Olga a break. Olga had a history of anxiety and depression, first diagnosed in 2006. She had been prescribed antidepressants and psychotherapy, but periods of stress in her life exacerbated the symptoms. In early 2018, she and Dylan moved into a 2-bedroom flat in London. Dylan's father helped when he could, but their finances were tight. particularly after Dylan's father lost his job that year. However, when Dylan reached his 10th birthday in 2020, he was unable to care for himself and required 24-hour assistance. Ealing Social Services provided 16 hours of support a week. Although Dylan could finger feed himself, he had to be fed his main meals and he wore diapers, which had to be changed at night when he soiled himself. In recent years, Dylan displayed challenging behavior, including patterns of screaming and poor sleep. Despite taking prescribed medication, he could be slow to settle and would often wake at night. Dylan's sight was deteriorating progressively as anticipated. He wore corrective glasses and adapted footwear. He could not walk for long and Olga often ended up carrying him. Dylan received specialist one-to-one schooling at the Mandeville School in Ealing, and Olga persistently fought for Dylan to get as much support as possible. But things changed when the COVID pandemic arrived. She was advised initially by the GP that Dylan's compromised immune system and resulting susceptibility to infection meant that he should shield at home. The school provided some equipment but no one to see him one-to-one, and without the breaks that her son going to school gave her during the week, she struggled to cope with the burden of providing him the level of dedicated attention required. Dylan's most recent carer, Miss Edita Skapitska, provided detailed evidence of the challenge that his behavior presented in mid-2020. Edita, who was a close friend of Olga, often stayed to help for longer than she was paid for in order to support her. Her son's condition resulted in him, in order to get what he wanted, sometimes taking off his nappy and spreading urine or feces around. He could be very loud and would scream for lengthy periods and smash things. Editor noticed the decline in Olga's mental health. She sought help in several directions. On the 26th of June 2020, she contacted the council and described the ongoing stress of looking after Dylan and her own difficulties with arthritis. She was concerned about what would happen to Dylan if she were no longer able to look after him. And then the carer was doing over 30 hours and asked her to be paid for it. Before long, she was experiencing nerve-shattering levels of tiredness. Shut up in the two-bedroom in London, she was soon struggling to cope. During the bleak days that followed, she tried to occupy Dylan with short walks and time on the trampoline in the garden, or to calm him with back-to-back episodes of his favorite cartoon, Peppa Pig. She bought him special pillows in the hope that they would help him sleep. Dylan had an ear infection in July and the doctor saw that she was struggling with his care, having to supervise him through all his waking hours because he was at risk of injury due to his poor vision and mobility, and then changing him at night. It was said she was not getting enough sleep and had painful knees aggravated by carrying him around. On July the 7th, she told Social Services that she was under significant pressure, feeling forgotten, and so stressed she was not functioning mentally. On the 10th of July, Dr. Hutchins, a consultant pediatrician, called, and after she had spoken, he was concerned at how difficult things were. On the 7th of August, another GP at the practice sent an email to Social Services to chase up the letter from his colleague in July. All the requests for help made by Olga and her doctor were under consideration by the council at the time that her mental health suffered a swift and devastating deterioration. Now, before I get into the details of what actually happened to her son and what she did, at this moment, do you feel sorry for her? How do you feel about the story so far? Yeah? Okay, let me tell you what happened, and then why don't you comment telling me how you feel after. So on Sunday the 9th of August, Editor was 100% sure that something was wrong after Olga spoke to her over the phone about big changes. When she arrived at her flat, Olga spoke about being the second Jesus, which is kind of weird because Jesus was a man. She was so concerned about her mental state that she made a number of covert recordings of what Olga said, hoping to use them to get some help for her. On August the 13th, Olga started talking about a letter messing with my head. She said she was going to save the world and referred to the Messiah, that God had been incarnated in her and she was being given knowledge and instructions. She believed she was receiving messages through her phone, which was giving her answers. She said, "They communicate to us via the internet. These demons or voices she started to hear, and there are encrypted messages that she could receive only if she was in a certain state." She said, "I get pictures and images popping into my head. Later, some inner knowledge is guiding me." She referred to having received a newsletter referring to the faculty of magic and maths, and speaking of tarot readings and magical actions taking place inside of her. I mean, it's clear to me she was losing the plot. She made outlandish religious claims, including for herself as the next Jesus, a coming apocalypse, and her commission to save the world. She told editor she wanted to go to a city in Russia. She sent WhatsApp messages to a neighbor on Friday morning, 14th of August, saying she had been chosen by God to save the world and that it was time to act. On the 15th of August, editor helped care for Dylan in the morning, but despite Olga's pleas that she stay, she had to leave and be at work later that afternoon. Olga was left alone with Dylan for the rest of the day. At 12 p.m., she telephoned editor and said, "Come and pick me up. You need to come and take me away from my home." Editor decided that she could not leave Olga alone without support and started driving to her flat. Then, around the same time, she sent a WhatsApp message to a neighbor saying, "I am done. Where are you?" She let editor in just before 1 a.m., but told her not to go into Dylan's bedroom. Olga then started raving, saying that she and Miss Editor had to go to Jerusalem. Olga told her, "I did what I did. Sometimes when things are good, it can be really evil." She had already booked and paid for 2 return airplane tickets to Israel, one for her and one for editor. She said, "They are waiting for us. I have got this mission and the endpoint is Jerusalem. I hear Megiddo is good this time of year." Editor recorded her saying she had been receiving messages and was making grandiose claims to have created all life, all nature and natural disasters. Olga said, "Now the purpose for the Messiah was to take her own child's life, and I only found out about it today, about what I had to do. I had a dream. Yes, it was terrible. Whatever I do, it's meant to be. The evil that looks like good must be destroyed." She was saying this. Now the reason why this is all significant is because prior to editor's arrival, she took her son's life. She throttled him and blocked his airway with a sponge, leaving his body surrounded by his favorite toys and tucked under a duvet. But with police, she confessed to the murder. She said, "You've witnessed everything that's been going on, everything that I've done. I've done everything with love. I was praying every second of the time I was suffocating him, because it had to be done. This is my job, to sacrifice my beloved child to create a balance in this world. I am the God-man." She said, "This is not mental illness, this is a completely different thing altogether. Today I have done what I have done. It's no joke. I thought about going to the police straight away, but after I had committed it, I realized that I shouldn't go to the police, but should go to Israel, as they are waiting for me there." Now, these recordings were transcribed and they were described in court by a consultant forensic psychiatrist as demonstrating that she was extremely psychotic at the time and delusional thinking was overtaking her mental processes. After a conversation with editor, she said, "You're right, we have to stay. Let's go for a walk. Let's go to the police station." And that's when she went to the police station and confessed. She arrived at 2:16 a.m. She went up to the police door. She knocked. As they opened the door, she said, "I murdered my child." Police went to the flat and found Dylan's lifeless body in her bed, lying on his back with the duvet pulled up to his neck. He was wearing a white t-shirt and a diaper. He had traces of rigor mortis and his pupils were dilated. Efforts to ventilate him were in vain and his heart remained in cardiac arrest. Despite the efforts of the emergency services, Dylan was beyond resuscitation and his life was formally pronounced extinct at 2:55 a.m. And a quick word on Dylan. He had all these physical issues. He had to wear a diaper at the age of 10. He had learning difficulties. I can only imagine some of the bullying he received throughout his whole life. And I do think That played a part in Olga. Look at my son. Look at how my son feels. My son is not wanted. He's not needed. He's rejected by everybody. I'm sure this played a part. I'm not rejecting what she did. I'm not excusing her. I'm just trying to do an analysis of my own on what kind of mentality she must have had raising him. The pathologist found signs of obstruction of Dylan's airways and fine petechial hemorrhages in the child's eyes, over his eyelids, and on the forehead. He also found fine linear petechial markings over the front of the neck. There was a possible abrasion on the left side of Dylan's neck. On dissection, the opening of the aphoranx revealed two substantial pieces of sponge, one above the other, tightly fitting and totally obstructing the larynx. The epiglottis was bent over to form part of the obstruction. Dylan's brain bore signs of damage consistent with the brain being deprived of oxygen through suffocation. The toxicology findings of a medication, melatonin, prescribed to help Dylan sleep, were above normal therapeutic bounds but did not contribute to his death. The cause of death was upper airway obstruction by foreign body, and compression of the neck, in addition, could not be excluded. Olga told police that it had happened before midnight and said that she was trying to end him softly, giving him lots of prescribed sleep medicine. She said, "I gave him a lot of tablets, which didn't help. Then I had to use my bra to make it happen, so I was trying to be as kind as possible. But due to his issues of sleep or whatever his issues are, he couldn't fall asleep. I had to use my bra, as I said, and yes, I put a sponge in his mouth to help him to depart sooner. And so then I located him in the place where he likes to sleep with his toys with all possible dignity and kindness." That's when Olga was arrested for murder. It was clear to those dealing with her that she was experiencing a mental health crisis despite her own assessment that she was mentally well. Subsequent examination of her internet search terms from June 2020 corroborate the descent into mental illness. She was eventually transferred to hospital in September and had been treated with antipsychotic and antidepressant medication. Now, in the trial, the judge said this. He said, "You have been found fit to plead and stand trial, so that it was on your first appearance on this court. On the 25th of January 2021, you pled guilty to the manslaughter of Dylan on the grounds of diminished responsibility." The judge went on to say, "That plea is acceptable to the prosecution. I must now pass sentence." He went on to say, "No one knows how and why the mind and will are taken over or surrendered to mental illness. Sometimes identifiable chemical changes are involved, but there is much that remains a mystery." He said Olga had a long-standing tendency to depressive illness. The psychiatrist did not tell us what led to her descent to homicide because they simply do not know. In their reports, they describe many of the circumstances of her life in 2020 as complicated. The courts, however, were concerned with responsibility and culpability. You see, when mental illness intervenes in a life, they allow psychiatric experts to assess where culpability lies. The judge said, "We received their professional opinions on what just outcomes are possible, although in the end, the judge decides where justice lies in a tragic case such as this one. The outcome dearest to the hearts of those who knew and loved Dylan is, of course, for his return, and no court can accomplish that." And he concluded that having studied the reports of three consultant forensic psychiatrists, Dr. Locke, Dr. Baird, and Dr. Bhattacharya, as well as their joint statements, and listened to all the other evidence regarding Olga's treating physician, they were instructed variously by the defense and the prosecution, but it acknowledges their duty to the court to give a truthful diagnosis. He further said, "All the experts agreed that Olga had a recurrent depressive illness for years, and that shortly before she took her son's life, it developed into a severe psychotic symptoms. In fact, Dr. Baird described this recognized mental disorder as an episode of depression but with the presence of hallucinations, delusions, psychomotor retardation, or stupor so severe that ordinary social activities are impossible." He went on to say that the hallucinations may or may not have been mood congruent. The other doctor, Dr. Locke, he stated that her symptoms were made considerably worse by the struggle to look after Dylan and several times worse because of COVID-19. The illness disturbed her mind to such an extent that it substantially impaired her ability to make rational decisions and exercise self-control. Although she understood the nature and quality of her actions, she was not insane at the time she took his life. Her responsibility for those actions were considered substantially diminished because of her severity of her mental illness. The judge also said that he must bear in mind the importance where appropriate of a panel element in the sentence. He noted that she was not taking antidepressant medication prescribed to her. In the lead up to mid-August, although she obtained a prescription for the medication from her doctor in early July. In addition, with the consequence of her actions is a death, the harm caused is the greatest possible. In the end, the judge finally decided that they were to apply the Sentencing Council guideline for manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. Appearing at the court via video link from the Orchard Hospital, Olga was sentenced to a hospital order without limit of time. The judge called the case rare and desperately sad and said that Olga murdered Dylan while in the grip of a very serious mental illness. Olga's ex-husband, he commented, inadequate support and funding of services with some people left without a voice. He said the impact of losing a child is devastating and hurtful. My son was sweet, artistic, and very loving. Dylan was the delight of my life. I miss my son. He was a gentle and happy and sweet boy. He loved travel and all he saw. I miss him more than words can say. The judge concluded the tragedy is that she loved him so dearly, as mother admits murdering her autistic son. So how do you conclude on this case? Firstly, the husband, where the fuck were you? Muppet. Although I really shouldn't judge, but that's how I feel. As for the murder, I mean, if the legal experts in Britain of all places, right, you know about the lenient sentences, in Britain of all places, I guess you just have to take their word for it. But, I mean, Olga didn't feel happy, she didn't feel appreciated, she didn't feel wanted, she didn't feel like she was a part of something, which is a human need, right, which is, I think, the basis for most depression. And she decided, well, I'm just going to take my son's life because, well, I can't do this anymore. I mean, I don't know, it's so hard for me to accept her mental illness given what she did, but I guess it is what it is. Let me know. What do you think? And finally, the case of Debra Gindorf.
She told her husband that in those moments that she heard a man's voice, a voice directing her to kill her children.
A woman murdered her kids. Could her husband ever be responsible? Today's story, we go to the state of Illinois. And this story really angered me. There's elements of postpartum depression, domestic abuse, and sadness. This is just a shocking crime, a desperate situation, a messed up relationship. Make sure you stay till the very end when I give you my 3-point analysis on why this crime happened. We start on March the 29th, 1985 at approximately 6:30 p.m. Debra Gindorf walked into the Zion Police Department and stated to the Zion Police, "I've killed my children." Gindorf was an unemployed 20-year-old single mother living in suburban Zion, estranged from her family and her physically abusive, alcoholic husband. At the police station, Debra appeared nervous and her hands were shaking. She did not smell of alcohol, she was not speaking loudly, and appeared glassy-eyed and trying to control her behavior. Debra was directed to Ray Nichols, a Zion police detective. She told Nichols her name and stated that she had killed her infant and small children at about 2 a.m. the prior morning. She gave the detective the names and birth dates of her children, the address of her apartment, and the key to her apartment. Although Debra was wringing her hands, Nichols did not perceive her to be acting out of the ordinary or say anything he could not understand. After waiving her constitutional rights, Debra stated that about 2 a.m. she took 3 boxes of Unisum sleeping capsules purchased at a local jewel store. She crushed the tablets and placed the substance in 3 piles. She then put a small amount in the baby's formula in a baby's bottle, gave an unknown amount to her little girl in a small juice container, and took the rest herself in a drink of Southern Comfort, of which she already had 5 shots. The children became sick and began vomiting, and she laid them in bed afterwards. She then passed out and woke up at 7:30 a.m., at which she realized the children were deceased. The children, one of them was Christina, who was only 23 months, and Jason, who was only 3 months old. Debra then turned on the gas stove, placed a towel over her head, and inhaled the fumes, passing out again. She woke up at 2 p.m. and realizing she's alive, she went to the police station. Debra also stated that she purchased one of the 3 boxes of Unisum on March the 21st, 1985, and crushed the 32 tablets at that time. She purchased the other 2 boxes the night before the incident. She indicated that she knew what she was doing and just wanted to be free and happy, and that she had been planning to kill her 2 children for about a month. 3 Zion police officers went to Debra's apartment, and upon approaching the apartment smelled a strong odor of natural gas. They entered the apartment, where they discovered the children in the bed, and they detected no vital signs. The cause of death of the 2 children was later determined as acute overdoses of the drug doxylamine succinate. I know I butchered that name, stop laughing. This was the active ingredient in Unisum sleeping pills. Neighbors of Debra in the apartment building, who were frequent companions of Debra and were mothers of small children, indicated that prior to March the 28th, they saw Debra regularly, and that they often ate with Debra and her children, that they had reciprocal babysitting arrangements with Debra, and that Debra kept her apartment very clean and took good care of her children, keeping them well fed and properly clothed. Debra, however, was observed to be frequently depressed, and after giving birth to Jason on January the 3rd, 1985, became increasingly more depressed. Many people call this postpartum depression. I'll come back to that later. Debra no longer wanted to do anything with her neighbors and became withdrawn and isolated. Debra's marriage was dissolved in June 1984, although she lived with her ex-husband until December of that same year. Her ex-husband admitted coming home drunk and getting into verbal and physical altercations with Debra on occasion. He stated he had abused Debra in the past and acknowledged that the ground upon which their marriage was dissolved was physical cruelty. Although her ex-husband stated he could not recall, neighbors testified that he violently attacked Debra when she was 8 months pregnant, 2 weeks before Christmas, while her daughter watched and cried in 1984. Now, concerning Debra's behavior the day of the murders, one neighbor who saw Debra hours before the incident unknowingly drove Debra to the store to buy the sleeping pills. They stated that Debra seemed normal and was not depressed, although they admitted he did not know Debra very well. Other neighbors who also saw Debra in the evening prior to the incident were apparently the last people to see her before she walked into the police station. They observed that she seemed more depressed than usual, not as talkative, and was unusually quiet and looked tired. They also noted as unusual Debra telling her daughter to hug and kiss a neighbor goodbye because they were going home. This was something she did not normally do. A number of letters and notes written by Debra were recovered from her apartment. These included letters to her ex-husband expressing feelings of sorrow for their failed marriage and her decision to do something which might upset him. Although this action was not revealed, a self-written will, a letter to her parents apologizing for her actions, and letters to her children expressing her affection for them was found. In addition, a letter to a friend was also found reflecting Debra's mood, a detailed account of what occurred and reasons why she committed the act. So to break down her situation, she had no money, she was unemployed, she had no purpose, she had an abusive husband, and then when she gave birth, she became mentally unstable. I'm not excusing anything she did, but of course, that is all a recipe for disaster. So what do you do with this woman? She's admitted to murdering her children. What do you think her punishment should be? Well, then the trial began. Lenore Walker, a psychologist with an extensive background in the areas of domestic violence and battered woman syndrome, testified on behalf of Debra. She interviewed Debra on May 10, 1985, to obtain her personal history. She also reviewed the police reports, the witness statements, the various letters, will and notes written by Debra, the hospital records, police records, records to prior assaults on Debra, a social and family history, psychological test data, and the results of further tests. And based on all this information, she asserted 3 diagnoses for Debra. Number 1, she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically battered woman syndrome, as a result of the situational disorder of her abusive relationship with her ex-husband. To me, that kind of makes sense. Number 2, Debra was afflicted with a major affective disorder, specifically major psychotic depression, the recurrent type. And number 3, Debra had an underlying borderline personality disorder coming from incomplete personality development. Debra was 20 years old at the time of the murder. I don't know what incomplete personality development means other than, well, she hadn't become an adult yet. Walker explained that those with the third condition have a sense of self or ego that is so weak and fragile that they slip in and out of psychotic kinds of episodes. That major affective disorder is caused both by the outside stress of such things as divorce or biochemical factors, both of which played a part here. Her husband was abusive, he left, and of course she's feeling all this depression after giving birth. The psychologist noted that Debra was administered 2 blood tests to determine whether any physiological factor was the cause of her depression. The first test, administered in the summer of 1985, indicated that depression-related biochemical imbalances were present in Debra's system. And after she was given various antidepressant drugs, a second test was done in October, which came back negative. The psychologist viewed both that Debra's mood was drastically improved after the drug therapy and that the test results went from being positive to negative, as indicated that her depression at the time of the offense had a physiological component. In her opinion, Debra was suffering from more than one mental disease and that Debra was not able to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law. Another psychologist on behalf of Debra, Sharon Strauss, interviewed Debra and reviewed the same materials that were considered by Walker. Strauss concluded that Debra had a mental disease, which she labeled as major depression with psychotic features accompanied by underlying borderline personality disorder. She explained that the combination of major depression and personality disorder can cause extreme psychosis, which, in Debra's case, caused episodic lapses from reality. Well, yeah, if you murder your kids, you have lapsed from reality, let's be fair. Strauss joined in Walker's statement that people afflicted with major depression can appear normal to lay people and stated her belief that Debra was not malingering or faking it. Strauss said that on the day of the murders, Debra was experiencing a psychotic episode. Now, in rebuttal to all this, the prosecution had their own psychiatrist. So we go to Dr. Ronald Barron, a psychiatrist who testified that he gathered data from Debra on October 1985 and reviewed Debra's letters and police reports and all the other reports from the mental health professionals. He said that Debra was suffering from a severe mental illness at the time of the offense, specifically a major depression disorder, recurrent type, and found that Debra was afflicted by a mixed type personality disorder with borderline antisocial and avoidant features. He attributed the onset of Debra's mental condition to her stormy marriage and its dissolution and agreed with Walker that the abuse inflicted upon by her ex-husband had resulted in a post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Barron, however, testified that even though Debra suffered from this severe mental illness, she was still able to recognize right from wrong and had the ability to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law. It was stipulated that during the interviews with a social worker in 1985, Debra showed no signs of stress and was coherent and oriented, and that Debra stated that she had become extremely isolated and bogged down with housework and the children, that she wanted to leave, but believed that if her children remained alive, they would lead lives like her own, and that she believed her children were in heaven and wanted to join them. Now, it was also stipulated that on January the 3rd, 1983, Debra went to the emergency room of Victoria Memorial Hospital, complaining that she was assaulted by her husband 5 days earlier, and that she had contusions and abrasions on her head, arms and right knee, and she was 30 weeks pregnant. And that Debra, on September the 15th, 1983, was brought to another hospital emergency room following a miscarriage, and that her husband was loud, obnoxious, and had a strong odor of alcohol about him, and Debra stated she was frightened of him. So the psychologist confirmed that she was in an abusive domestic relationship, but she did know right from wrong. So where do we go from here? Well, following the final arguments of all the parties involved, the trial court determined that Debra failed to meet her burden on the insanity issue and found her guilty but mentally ill of murder. The court found that all the expert testimony was successfully attacked by both sides, and although it did not disregard the testimony, the court determined that the experts' opinions concerning Debra's conduct were secondary to the law witness testimony concerning the events prior to and following the incident. It also took into account Debra's personal history and stormy marriage, and considered the letters and notes written by Debra before and after the incident. The court found that Debra was not insane at the time of the incident, but was suffering from a mental illness, in that she had a substantial disorder of thought, mood and behavior which affected her at the time of the incident, but did not impair her judgment to the extent that she was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of her behavior or unable to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law. So in 1986, Debra was sentenced to life. Do you think that was the correct decision? Because that same doctor, Ronald Barron, he wrote a letter to the governor at the time, George Ryan. In this letter he said, "I am appealing to you to correct the situation. You have shown by your attitude about the death penalty and that you have a sense of fairness and compassion. This is a special situation which needs your humanitarian touch." Now Ryan didn't think so, and before he left office, he did commute quite a lot of people from death row and all these places, but he declined to release Debra. At the time, while being interviewed, Debra referred to the murders as an accident. She went on to say, "I killed my kids. Even though it happened with my own hands, it wasn't me who killed them, it was the illness." Now the reason why this came about is because many believed she should be released, or at least her term in jail should be reduced from the life sentence, because there were so many mitigating circumstances. So then, in an unusual, untimely move, the chairman of the Illinois Prisoner Review Board waived a 1-year waiting requirement and invited Debra to reapply immediately for executive clemency. Now, under normal circumstances, petitioners who are denied by the governor must wait 1 year from the day of denial. And then, in 2009, Governor Pat Quinn announced that he will be commuting Debra's sentence to time served, meaning she was eligible for immediate release on parole because she served 24 years and qualified for day-to-day conduct and time. Experts conceded she was a depressed and abused wife but couldn't agree what was wrong with her. She and her supporters believed she had postpartum depression when she decided to kill her children. Kathleen Hamill of the State Defender's Office, who had represented Debra since 1986, believed Quinn found the postpartum arguments in her petition for clemency moving. The action sets no legal precedent but advances recognition of a disorder that psychiatric wards had taken seriously just now. Back then they didn't care. Back then it was called baby blues, I think. Postpartum depression was not a term. So just to conclude, Gindorf reported depression after the birth of her first child, but she assumed it was because she was abused. She and her husband divorced, and after she became pregnant with Jason and after his birth, she started hearing voices and had crying spells. She saw death as a mode of transportation to heaven. They would all be in heaven, she was thinking. She swallowed lethal doses of alcohol and sleeping pills, but worried about her children when they woke up crying. so she spiked their formula and hoped they would never wake up. And before I get to my why this happened, this story falls under the banner of filicide. And filicide is divided into 5 categories based on the offender's intent. Now these 5 categories, I'm going to base them to you, and I want you to tell me which one applies in Debra's case. So number one reason why filicide is done is due to altruistic reasons. The parent believes that they are relieving real or imagined suffering by taking the child's life, and that the child dying is in the child's best interest. Secondly, in acutely psychotic filicide, the parent kills the child in response to psychosis and not because of a rational motive. In other words, they are cuckoo. Number 3, unwanted child filicide occurs when a parent kills a child perceived to be a hindrance. In other words, I don't want you, bruv. Number 4, you have fatal maltreatment or accidental filicide. Involves the unintentional death of a child resulting from parental abuse or neglect. Finally, you have spousal revenge. This is when the parent takes the life of the child to spite the other parents. One other thing to consider is postpartum depression. It's the job of the baby's father to ensure the sanctity, the safety, and the serenity of the mother. Have you ever been there in the room when a child is being born? There's nothing in this world that can replicate it, that's for sure. The physical trauma a woman goes through, she needs at least maybe 1 or 2 months from the physical recovery, and this is when she needs her man the most. Furthermore, experts estimate that approximately 50 to 80% of new mothers experience some kind of postpartum depression after childbirth, which tells you the importance of the boyfriend, husband, father, whoever. It also tells you the importance of a safety network. Postpartum depression is characterized by irritability, mood swings, significant appetite changes, and emotional changes. At times, the mother could feel like she's inadequate. She's feeling anxiety toward the child. A lot of mothers that experience this call themselves bad mothers, and they have heightening thoughts of harming the child. They'll experience severe depression characterized by mood swings, eating disorders, insomnia, and paranoia. I'm telling you all this because this shit is important, and it's estimated that to recover from all of this, it could take 6 to 12 months. Again, emphasizing the importance of a support system. So now I come on to my 3 reasons. Where was the husband? I hate men who abandon their kids, classed as cowards. I mean, her husband's physical abuse, he was never there. He didn't care. He didn't want the child. He didn't want Debra. Now you may ask, she did the murder, so why am I laying into the husband? Well, it's because the doctors and the jurors and the judges have concluded on Debra already. They've already made their decision. But in the trial, where was the trial of the husband? Where was his accountability? He abandoned his family when they needed him the most. He was an alcoholic. He abused a mother. Who was feeding the kids? Who was putting them to sleep? Who was changing the diaper? Who paid for their well-being? Who gave them love and warmth they need for their survival? Certainly wasn't him. And now the support system. You know, there's a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. In many cultures, the new mother will go and stay with her mother for about a month or 2, maybe 3 months, so she can get help from her sister, aunties, cousins, relative, whoever, to raise the child while she's going through this physical recovery, if you like, while she is trying to overcome whatever mental issues she's experiencing postpartum it may be. So a support system is not just needed, it is necessary. It is vital. Where were hers? She was estranged from her family. Her husband didn't want her. Where was hers? And this is where I'm conflicted, because I've always believed you are accountable for yourself only. Yes, her husband should be torn a new arse, verbally that is, and he needs to be held accountable. But what about Debra? If it was determined by many experts that she was of sound mind, she was just a little bit sad, which is basically what the prosecution's psychiatrist said, and that she knew from right or wrong, then well, she knew what she was doing. And even though we've all been through ups and downs, people have let us down. I've never killed. I'm assuming you haven't, let alone children. What the hell is wrong with you? Maybe the 20 to 30 years that she served, maybe that was the correct outcome. Maybe her not spending the rest of her life in jail was correct, and that 20, 30 years was best. But just a sad story. 23 months and 3 months. Not even 2 years. Wow. Thank you for watching.